if we had an actual press in our country, what I mean is a press who is actually focused on looking into things that literally do not make sense on the surface, and they report exactly what it is they see, regardless of how it affects either candidate or any events transpiring. Let me give you a few examples. Jeffrey Epstein, I think, unless you are completely and utterly brainwashed, the notion that in a high security max prison where you are looked at 24/7, that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself by hanging himself with the sheets. In that moment, in that second, the prison guards just happened to have the cameras go off, so there's no footage of the event. And the sheets in a max security prison are like tissue paper. You even had somebody who did an autopsy on the body talking about the damage that did not look like a suicide. But according to our lying, dumbass media who don't do their jobs, Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. You see where I'm going with this? Let me give you another one, all right? Black Lives Matter has protest in all 50 states. Not to mention in multiple other countries like France and Britain. To have such a large network of protesters, organization, and to have a large platform, you need cash. The question is, where is this cash coming from? You see, this stuff does not make any sense. If you really want to look at who runs things, don't look at the politicians. Look at who their corporate backers are. Same thing with the media. Let me give you one more tidbit of information, then we will get into Black Lives Matter's funding. Pfizer, which is a pharmaceutical company, is the number one advertiser for Fox News and for CNN. No wonder you have these large media corporations, these mockingbird media puppets, who are talking bad about hydroxychloroquine. You had multiple scientists, researchers from Ivy League schools like Harvard, Yale, the London School of Medicine, who said hydroxychloroquine works if you take it early. You had doctors, practicing physicians who said hydroxychloroquine works. But let's listen to Anderson Pooper. Let's listen to Don Dumbass Lemon. Let's not actually listen to real doctors or physicians about these things. Now that that has been out of the way, let's get into a bit of Black Lives Matter. One of the things I noticed when I was looking into the funding is not only are large corporations like Nike, Walmart, and Target, which we will get into, donating money to Black Lives Matter, but you also have these large non-governmental organizations, NGOs for short. For those of you unfamiliar, we had people called the robber barons in the Gilded Age way back when, in the early 1900s. You've probably seen these guys on the History Channel, or you've learned a bit about them in your school. You had Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford. If you study a little bit more, you have people like Jay Gould, Cornelius Vanderbilt, other people like that. Basically, these robber barons, or captains of industry, however you want to refer to them as, were the Jeff Bezos, the Bill Gates of that era. Basically, let me give you an example to make this easy. Say John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller had a company called Standard Oil. This corporation controlled 90% of the oil. What he would do is he would lowball his competition. He would sell his oil for such a cheap price that his competitor would be forced to go bankrupt, or they would have to concede and he would buy them out. He controlled entire industries. The whole premise of these people, just like Andrew Carnegie, U.S. Steel, when it became a corporation, was 90% of all steel. The whole premise was more control over resources. For centuries, you've had elites who have controlled resources. A handful of companies own the media, a handful of companies own the food, and so on and so forth. That's what it's all about. Getting rid of the competition and owning all the resources that are available. We're supposed to believe that the robber barons would lie, cheat, and steal to attain their wealth. They're also famous for treating their employees like complete and utter shit. Andrew Carnegie wanted to make his employees work more hours while cutting their pay when he was on his little Irish vacation. You had his workers who had a violent insurrection. Henry Frick at the time was the second guy in command at Carnegie Steel. You basically had a shootout where Henry Frick was shot. But the point I'm making is the working conditions in U.S. Steel for the average worker was horrid. The only day they got off was Sunday. They worked 6 days a week. The only holiday they got off was Christmas. They were working 12-hour shifts. You had children working in those factories, but we're supposed to believe all of a sudden, after fighting, after lowballing competition, and hey, it's business. I understand that. But I don't think we need the same people who are hard-nosed businessmen like Steve Jobs trying to lecture us about virtues. Basically, we're supposed to believe that the robber barons spent years fighting to get to the top, and then all of a sudden they became good. A magical switch must have flipped in their minds. We don't care about our workers. Oh, now we do because we have all the money, right? Or could it be that they saw the power of public relations and how instrumental public relations could be to advance their continued success? Under the guise of good, under the guise of philanthropy, the robber barons set up these non-governmental organizations, which I call NGOs for short. Andrew Carnegie talked about spending the entire first half of his life obtaining wealth and the entire second part of his life giving it away. The very first instance of this was in 1902 when Rockefeller formed the General Education Board with a $1 million donation. Eventually, you had $180 million that went towards this. That is why when you hear people say, why are we learning this bullshit like Shakespeare and mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but we're not learning about taxes We're not learning about assets and liabilities. We're not learning about how to grow wealth. That's because the wealthy families want less competition. John D. Rockefeller is famous for saying competition is a sin. John D. Rockefeller and the elite families like the Rothschilds, the Carnegies, they want their family at the top. They do not want us to understand the resources of how to build wealth, of how to educate ourselves, or any of these other things. The General Education Board was comprised mostly of work from Carnegie and Rockefeller's hands. If you look at John D. Rockefeller, you study in depth the last 40 years of his life when he wasn't really working a lot, when he was in retirement at his estate in Westchester, New York, he was really trying to social engineer the structure of modern philanthropy. And so was Andrew Carnegie. He spent the last 40 years using his fortune under the guise of philanthropy to create foundations that had a major effect on medicine, education, and scientific research. You had a Secretary of Education who was not Secretary of Education rather, but the Secretary of the General Board, who was Alexander Flexner. Now, Flexner looked at all medical schools over the country. He created a report called the Flexner Report that was aimed at making medicine more, quote, scientific, quote, scientific, which gave rise to the pharmaceutical drugs, which derived from petroleum, and Standard Oil just happened to be in the petroleum industry, right? Funny how that works. But Rockefeller cares, he's virtuous, blah, 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 right? Just like Walmart and Jeff Bezos, they care. They care about poor people. But Rockefeller diversified into growing drug companies, including IG Farben. IG Farben, and you can look this up, this is in congressional reports, this isn't me saying it. IG Farben provided chemicals to Hitler and the Nazis, just like Ford provided tanks to the Nazis. You can look this up, it's all history, it's all admitted. Eventually, IG Farben broke into smaller companies, including Bayer, AFGA, and BASF. What does this have to do with Black Lives Matter? Well, the robber barons use their NGOs in order to donate to causes to further increase their power over your life, over resources, science, education, music, all other things. There's a lot more, but I can't get into it right now. After a while, I'm going to upload a video talking more about these foundations. But do you really think the Rockefellers, Jeff Bezos, Walmart, McDonald's give a shit about the average person? And why should they, right? Why should they? But we are led to believe that they care. Think about Walmart. Walmart is the modern day Standard Oil. They are notorious for treating their workers like absolute shit. But we're supposed to believe all of a sudden Walmart cares. If you look at the Ford Foundation, which was set up by Henry Ford supplied the Nazis with tanks, and he even won the highest civilian award. Hitler had a photo of Henry Ford. You can look all this up. This is all history. This is all admitted. But since 2016, the Ford Foundation has given around $7.8 million to BLM and similar groups. If you go to the Rockefeller Foundation, there's an article titled Reflecting on Violence Against African Americans by Dr. Shaw. The Carnegie Endowment, on their official website, they list who they give their donations to. Their highest donations are $1 million or above. And one of those organizations that they give to, and this is on their official website, the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, it gives 1 million or above to the Open Society Foundation. Now, the Open Society Foundation on its own website says it gives 220 million in investment in racial justice. What's the point I'm making? These same organizations which screwed over the educational system, which screwed over the pharmaceutical industry and medicine, is now donating to Black Lives Matter. Why is that? We will get into that in a minute. Google is giving 12 million, Facebook and Amazon 10 million. Amazon's the same way. I personally know people who worked at Amazon that said it was absolute hell. Anyone who treats their workers like shit but claims to care about humanity is just full of it. Apple 100 million. Walmart 100 million over 5 years to create a new center for racial equality. Over 5 years to Walmart is donating over 5 years to create a new center for racial equality. Target 10 million, Home Depot 1 million. Next time I'm going to damn Lowe's. Screw you, Home Depot. EA 1 million, Ubisoft 100,000 to NAACP and BLM. It's a gaming company. They make good games, hate to admit it. Etsy 1 million, the clothing company. Levi's 20,000. Gap 250,000. Nike 40 million. Same thing with Nike. They make their damn shoes in Indonesia, Pakistan, Vietnam, and these slave factories. But instead of actually using that 40 million to help those people, they're just going to give it to BLM. But Nike cares. See, they're virtuous, they're good. McDonald's 1 million, Wendy's 500,000. Wendy's had this total bullshit virtue signaling post where they're like, we see what's going on with you African Americans and we can stay silent no longer. We're giving 500,000 to Black Lives Matter. Coca-Cola 2.5 million. Okay. So the point I'm making is you don't just become an 8-figure company or organization rather who is able to organize, mobilize, blah blah blah. And think about this as well. If you are working for